So were you anticipating that this spat control issue would be as big as it is and as difficult as it is?
No, no, it was never identified at all. No.
So meaning DPI didn't ever bring it up with you?
No, I mean, no, no. It's never been identified as an issue. No,
Do you think it is an issue now? Is it something that you're having to
not
rethink?
well. It's an issue because it's perceived as an issue in within some of the stakeholders within the community. Based on the scientific advice we're getting and the advice from government, it's not an issue.
From my reading of the DPI material, there wasn't any expectation to do any baseline surveys of mussel populations in the bay. Is that right?
That's right, because it's an endemic species, so naturally occurs there. So I don't think that would have come up in the EIS.
There wasn't a concern that populations could impact ecosystems at all?
No, because there'd never been any examples of that overseas with mussel farms that I'm aware of.
You say there are no examples of the Gallo provincialis being a problem?
Not in areas where they're endemic.
So this whole endemism debate is really
Mm.
complicated. And maybe if you could clarify for me more your position on that, because you'd said before that it was most likely going to be a hybrid between the native planatus and the Gallo provincialis.
Well, okay, so let's go back. So there's Gallo provincialis and planillatus, and then there's a hybrid,
And so which
and
do we have here?
all three,
So how do you know that you're farming the endemic?
because they're all endemic.
And that's according to DPI that told you that,
Correct, yeah,
or okay.
correct.
And so when you first started, were you reading any of the scientific material outside of DPI about the invasiveness of Galla provincialis?
Well, no, they won't because we're growing they're invasive if they're not endemic. It's like saying a kangaroo. If you took a kangaroo to another country, it might be invasive, but in Australia, it's not.
Although kangaroos have been here a long time, and the argument is that Galla provincialis hasn't.
Again, I mean, this is where there's conjecture, but the advice we've got is that they've been here for 1 million or 600,000 to 1 million years. I mean, it's probably, to be fair, Kat, it's probably best that you take this up with scientists
Mm. That's
because
what I'd
that's where
like
we're
to.
getting our advice from. So, I think.
Now I know you've had lots of challenges in the years since you started, and I was really curious about an article I read that where you talked about the difficulty you'd had for like 6 months of the year being unable to harvest, and
Mm.
that the mussels had become so large they'd actually fallen from the long lines, from the ropes onto the seafloor. I wondered how that fits in with the the obligation you have to harvest before spawning happens. And if I understand it correctly, you want to harvest before spawning happens because that makes for tastier mussels. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, probably you would have been to a restaurant and eaten mussels where there's not much meat in the shell, so it's a little bit disappointing. So you do want to harvest the mussels when they're nice and plump and full. But mussels spawn all the time, to be fair. To take an act of God to control when mussels can spawn. So they naturally spawn at certain times of the year, but they will spawn throughout the year depending on changes in salinity, temperature, pressure. A whole lot of different environmental influences can trigger a spawning event.
And so, if you have a situation where you're not able to spawn as you did before and the mussels are actually settling on the seafloor, do you then go in and somehow clean that up, or you leave them there, or what happens?
No, yeah, it's not. We can't clean them up.
You can't take them off the seafloor?
No, because that'd be dredgings, which would be very destructive to the environment.
Oh, so there's not an obligation in the terms of your lease that you have to clean the seafloor or clean the ropes, for example?
We have to clean the ropes, so we do clean our ropes. Basically, when the ropes come on board the deck of the boat, they get cleaned, and it's just it's just a management. We want to clean the ropes.
So all of that that's on the ropes all gets taken off. I mean, it doesn't end up on the seafloor. It doesn't get dumped on the seafloor. It's taken away.
Yeah, we harvest the ropes on the boat. So
Yeah, I've never actually seen the
no,
mussel lines. So only what I see from the pictures is that the mussels are growing in among a lot of other things. So if you have clean off those ropes from time to time, which I presume you do, but maybe you don't.
Well, no, we don't. They get clean when we harvest. I think and then the ropes go back into shore.
The stuff that you clean off the ropes, where does that end up?
Well, some of it ends up back in the factory and some of it would go off the side of the boat.
This issue of the mussels being on the seafloor underneath the farm, do you know, are you down there regularly diving or looking at that? Do you know how much is there? Because one of the divers had said that they had seen large amounts of mussels underneath, and I wasn't sure if that was normal or that was because you had had so many problems with the harvesting during the bad weather.
No idea. I mean, normally the bottom's fairly it's a fairly clean, sandy bottom. So
Oh, so you don't actually go down there monitoring underneath the farms at all?
we do. We do a benthic survey, which is part of our lease agreement. So the benthic survey has found that there's been no noticeable, tangible difference.
And how often does that benthic survey happen?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. It's every couple of years.
When I talked to you last time, I think you mentioned that you were sourcing the mussels from Victoria. Is that still the case?
We source from Victoria on a continual basis, as well as Eden, as well as Jervis Bay, but we continue to get from Victoria as well.
And then but everything that comes from Victoria or wherever still gets marketed as Jervis Bay mussels. Is that right?
No, on the packaging it says that they can be also sourced from Victoria.
Okay. So given that all of these concerns and images have been circulating and the divers are very concerned, are you
Some divers are very concerned. Some divers love diving out on the mussel farm. They see it as a real benefit for themselves because there's more marine life out there. So there's a lot of divers within the community that love having the mussel farm out there, and then there's other divers out in the community that don't.
So do you think that the evidence that they're picking up anecdotally from their diving is worthy of more investigation?
Well, there is going to be more investigation into it. And what I support is science. I really think everything has to go back to scientific rigor, published data.
So you think that this kind of science could or should happen before you take the next step into expansion?
No, because all the current science and the views that we're hearing back from scientists is this is all natural part of the cycle. So no, not at the moment, because we've got a few non-scientists that have got concerns, but the science community seem very comfortable with where we're at the moment.
Can you maybe suggest some of those scientists that I could talk to that have that
No,
point
I
of view?
suggest you talk to the Department of Primary Industry because that's where we're taking our advice from.
Are there any practices do you think could or should be changed in the way you're doing things to create a safer aquaculture environment?
I mean, longline mussel farming is already considered one of the most sustainable food production methods in the world. In fact, if you Google world's most sustainable foods, mussels typically come up in the top 3 or 4. If we're talking about food security in a planet where we're trying to grow foods that don't contribute to climate change, don't use more arable land, don't use more fresh water, don't use phosphates, and then have a net benefit by having a multiplier effect of biodiversity around the marine leases and more abundance of marine life around the marine leases, plus they're taking phosphorus and nitrogen out of the environment. I'm incredibly proud of what we're doing. We're actually one of the most sustainable forms of food production in the world and one of the most cost-effective forms of protein. The fact that we can do it within Jervis Bay Marine Park, so you can actually demonstrate that you've got one of the most sustainable food production methods within a marine park. I'm proud of that. It's fantastic.
A number of times I've heard you say how good it is that you're able to do this within a marine park. And yet that's one of the biggest concerns from the community is that this is the kind of thing that shouldn't be happening in a marine park. So what is it about operating in a marine park that makes it better for you?
Yeah, I don't think it's better or worse, but I mean, from our position, we're really proud that we can demonstrate sustainable food production within a marine park. We think that's a good thing.
You're still happy that Jervis Bay is the right location for your farm, or would you consider a different location?
Well, Jervis Bay is a fantastic location for the farm. There's not a lot of good locations for mussel farming in New South Wales. You've really only got Jervis Bay and Twofold Bay.
In terms of your big vision, like obviously you're not out to destroy the marine park, you're out to grow
No,
sustainable
far from it.
food.
Well, we're
Right.
cleaning the marine park. I mean, the Nature Conservancy, which is an NGO organisation, they've done research and they've shown that on longline mussel farming, there's 3.6 times multiple for abundance and a 1.1 multiple for diversity, marine diversity.
Would you like to see your farms increase in size? Or mussels, of course, are still pretty expensive, but as a sustainable
Hey,
protein.
hang on. On what metric are they expensive? I mean, what other seafood could you go and buy? So you can go into a retailer at the moment and buy mussels from anywhere between $10 to $12 a kilo, and that'll be enough to feed two people. To me, that's one of the cheapest. I challenge you to, outside maybe chicken. I can't think of a cheaper seafood.
Globally, we need to feed the world, we need to provide
Mm,
protein, and
mm,
aquaculture becomes increasingly important.
mm,
Important not necessarily to a supermarket, first world kind of landscape, more as an affordable source of protein
mm,
en masse. Do you think that
mm.
mussels have that capacity?
Absolutely. I mean, of all the foods that you can grow in the ocean, mussels would be one of those, would fit into that category for sure.
In Twofold Bay, are you still harvesting down there, or that's only your source of spat?
No, we do harvest mussels for human consumption from there too.
And so this complicated issue of trying to find spat that is the native.
We're having a circular argument here because the research, well, what I'm being told is they're both native. So you're making the assumption that one's not native and the other is. What I'm being told by the scientists and this is all published work is that they're both native. So
Based on the pictures now that have been circulating, are you personally concerned about these blooms of mussels on the some of the reefs, shallow reefs around Jervis Bay?
basically, we've had similar spat falls in Bateman's Bay, in Bermagui, in Lakes Entrance. So this is why, Kat, it's really critical that we always go back to science. It's got to be driven by the science. So we've had kelp bed die-offs, and so when the kelp dies off, you end up with bare rock. And mussels are opportunistic, so they're going to try to settle somewhere. We've also had marine heat waves along the New South Wales coast. You know, we know that mussel populations come and go. There's always this boom and bust, and that's been recorded throughout time. So I'm going to be driven by the science. I have to be driven by the science, and we have to be driven by what's been published. You know, you can go and talk to people in Bateman's Bay, and they've had mussels growing on the rocks around there as well,
And so you're hearing
and
that.
Bermagui and Lakes Entrance. You can go to all those places and talk to them.
So you're hearing that from other like fishing operators, divers. Just,
Oh, it's only well, we talk to oyster farmers all the time, so it's just we're in the industry, so we hear about it.
I mean, they'd be noticing changes because they're in the water. I mean, how are they seeing the mussels underwater or from in the
Just,
tidal
just,
zone?
just being out in the water. Um, I mean, you've also got to put it in context. Our mussel farm area is less than 1% of the total of Jervis Bay's area.
So you're saying that the impact is
Well, I'm
negligible?
saying that the overall biomass of the farm population of mussels is minimal compared to the overall biomass of mussels as a whole in Jervis Bay. Again, I'm just going on the advice, and I'd suggest you go and talk to the Department of Primary Industry. Okay,
We can't get access to DPI scientists, and as you know, DPI dispute those
well, it,
scientific findings.
well, it depends. Look, I think they've got every right to dispute them if they're not published peer-reviewed work. That's what gives something credibility.
And so, for example, the work that's come out of University of Queensland or others that have been quoted in the submissions process, you don't consider them.
No, I think everything that's been published, as long as it is published and peer-reviewed, absolutely.
Mm. Well, I certainly hope that we can get some more input from DPI on the science, especially if that is the source of your information. If all of your information comes from them, then the public needs that information too to try and put to rest, I'm sorry, a lot of the contentions that are
But
flying around.
you've got that information, Kat, because if you go to the Department of Planning website, you've got the same information as me.
But there seems to be a bit of difference in interpretation of some of the work.
Oh, well, as there should be. I mean, that's what gives scientific rigor. I don't think you should be introducing science that hasn't come from peer-reviewed published works.
There are examples of that going around.
I'm not going to make any more further comment. You're a journalist. You can go looking for that.